another look at our agenda so you can plan accordingly. Amy's session is going to go until 12:15. So we'll have Q&A towards the end of her presentation, and then have a little lunch break before we move on to our last session with Matt Delaney. So Matt, I'll go ahead and stop sharing if you want to start sharing, and then
Okay.
Once we get your screen up, you could go ahead and introduce Amy.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Okay, great. Great. So our next speaker is Amy Landvoigt. She is a District 20 Watermaster for the Oregon Water Resources Department. She has worked as a hydrotech, a well inspector, and a hydrogeologist. She received a bachelor's degree in geology from Southern Oregon University in 1997. Her past work includes working for the Oregon Department of Transportation in their geo-hydro section, having worked on a drill rig, and later as a geologist. In this presentation, Amy will provide a general background on the history of Oregon water law and an introduction to the services provided by the Oregon Water Resources Department. Her talk will cover the basic options available to farmers who are seeking new water rights and the challenges and uncertainties associated with obtaining new water rights and what alternatives may be available. So Amy, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Matt. Well, first of all, I would just like to thank folks, to thank the Dry Farming Institute for inviting me to be a part of this group. I know it's not always fun to invite a government regulator / enforcer into a conversation, so I really appreciate the invitation to be a part of this. Our agency, you know, we have kind of a mode of voluntary compliance, and we really do try to work with folks. And I think that this is just hopefully can be a really great partnership where a lot of the things that the Dry Farming Institute is advocating for is going to be something that we can help to figure out how we're going to fold these new ideas into existing water law. So to start, just as an introduction to Oregon water law, Oregon water law was developed as a system for allocating and using water. This picture here kind of shows how, how early water rights were developed. Rivers were, ditch systems were taken off rivers and maintained with gates and channels, and water was kind of channelized through farmlands and with surface and flood irrigation. And obviously we've come a long way from then. But when water law was developed, in fact, everywhere west of the Mississippi was developed under the doctrine of prior appropriation, which means the first in time is the first in right. So as opposed to the East Coast, where on the East Coast, if a river runs past your property, then it's yours. Then you get the water that runs past your property and so on. In Oregon, whoever has the oldest water right on that stream, they get priority over other users during times of short supply. And that's a big part of what I do, is allocating that during times of low flow in the summertime and figuring out which uses are first in time and that sort of thing. Okay, next slide, please. You probably have all heard that Oregon's water is publicly owned. That means that it is managed by the Oregon Water Resources Department, who I work for. And so all water within the state from all sources of water belongs to the public. And we have many laws and rules defining how that water is allocated to the public. Okay, next slide. Oh, I need to move my chat box here. So an exempt use of water means that it's a water use where you don't need to apply for a water right first. So if you live in the country and your home is on a well, these are the things that you can do with your well without having to first apply for a water right. The first is single and group domestic. The upper limit of that is 15,000 gallons a day. And that's just for the in-home use. That's not getting to the irrigation piece of it. And the reason that number is so high, because obviously nobody needs 15,000 gallons a day for a home, but in a situation where, like, let's say you've got a small neighborhood and there's just simply not enough land for each home to have a well and a septic, it allows, Oregon water law allows that well can be shared by multiple homes, as long as that total in-home use shared doesn't exceed 15,000 gallons a day. So that's one thing that a lot of people call me up and they say, well, don't I get 15,000 gallons? Not exactly, not exactly. Livestock watering, that means if you have livestock, you can use your well to provide drinking water for your livestock. However, that is not for pasture irrigation. Any kind of pasture irrigation over a half acre would require a water right. Commercial uses, so this one is probably not one that's gonna really apply to this group a whole lot, but it is worth discussing. You are allowed a single commercial use from your well that doesn't exceed 5,000 gallons a day, but that use cannot be used for irrigation. So any kind of, running water to a shop, if you have like a processing facility, if, like, let's say you have a small farm, a vegetable farm, and you want a station for workers to be able to like have a bathroom for workers and hand washing, vegetable washing, those things would all be covered under that 5,000 gallons a day, but the irrigation piece is not. And then for lawn and garden irrigation, you are allowed up to a half acre of non-commercial irrigation. And non-commercial being the real key word there. Even if you have a sub half acre plot, if it's for commercial irrigation and you're using your well, it does require a water right. So the main theme that, to take away from these exempt uses is that if you're doing commercial irrigation from your well, it requires a water right. And I'm going to get into a little bit later the difficulties of obtaining a new groundwater right. Okay, Matt, next slide, please. And so here's exempt uses of surface water. So just, I don't think I clarified before, but the state defines surface water and groundwater separately. I know that there's not always a clean line to draw, like where does surface water begin and where does groundwater end. We have that defined for our agency, but other agencies, depending on their functions, may define it differently. But for the purposes of Oregon water law, any water that touches the natural ground, so once a drop of water lands on your lawn, it becomes surface water. And so these exempt uses of surface water, they don't apply just to rivers and streams. They apply to any water that, is on the natural ground. And I think that's gonna be something that I'm looking forward to really hammering down some definitions in the future when we talk about some of these other practices. But anyway, so the exempt uses of surface water, so these are, again, uses that don't require a water right. It is livestock watering, so drinking water for livestock, emergency firefighting, and this is not keeping your lawn green in case a fire comes one day, which I have been asked. This is active firefighting, like the fires we just had here in Oregon. And then land management practices such as soil conservation and water quality. This has to do with, this is one of the areas where I think a lot of the practices that we heard about in Andrew's presentation, this is where I'm thinking we might be able to find some overlap, maybe to, work with some of these practices. Okay, next slide, please. So commercial irrigation from a well. So we're going back to groundwater. Commercial irrigation from a well requires a water right, regardless of acreage. The new, the sub half acre issue never came about until recreational marijuana was legalized. And then that that one got really tested because obviously there were a lot of very commercial, very small irrigation projects that were going on that people did not realize that they needed a water right. If you apply for a water right for a well, a new application will likely take over a year to process. So that's definitely something that makes it difficult when you're looking at purchasing a new property. I know that it can be difficult to look at purchasing a new property and not know if it has water rights, and then also not be able to apply and find out if you're going to be able to get a water right within a time frame of a home purchase. And again, there is no guarantee that a groundwater right will be issued. We look at a lot of different things when reviewing groundwater applications, hydraulic connection with streams, well construction issues, lots of different things. So there's a lot of things that we're doing during that time frame to process those applications. And then also over the years, groundwater limited areas and critical groundwater areas further restrict uses. So in areas where we have recognized that the water table can be prone to overdraft, we have implemented aquifer specific restrictions where we just say no more new water right applications in this particular aquifer or multiple aquifers. And those, if you're in a groundwater limited area, at least the ones in my district, other parts of the state I'm not sure about. I don't want to speak for other parts of the state necessarily, but in my district, domestic uses, those exempt domestic uses are not controlled by the groundwater limited areas. Those groundwater limited areas are put in place, in part to protect those domestic users with shallower wells. Okay, next slide, please. And these are the two groundwater limited areas in my district. If there are folks who live around here, this is the line between Multnomah County and Clackamas County. To the east, on the east side of the map, there's Sandy, city of Sandy. On the west side of the map, that's kind of getting into Happy Valley, Damascus, and the river to the south there is the Clackamas River. And those are section lines. So each of those squares is a 1 square mile area. So you can see that, this is a lot of farmland that is affected by these groundwater limited areas. It's an area that was in the 90s really heavily used by nurseries, and I believe it's the popularity of nurseries in that area that likely led to these limited areas going into place, although I'm not 100% sure about that because I wasn't around at that time, but that's what I would suspect these limited areas came from. Okay, next slide, please. So surface water. So this is getting into, can I get a water right for surface water? Can I apply for a water right and stick a pump in the Clackamas River and pump out of the Clackamas River? The short answer is no. This is why. Surface water availability, a lot of people have a kind of a idea that Oregon is this really wet place with it's just rain, cold and rain all the time. But the thing is when people need water is not when it's cold and wet. And so, people often say, well, I only need a little bit of water. I only need to take a little water out of the Clackamas. And it's, well, if you want to take it out of the Clackamas in December, which I'm guessing you don't want to do, then, you might be able to do that, but, not in the summertime. And this map on the map on the left, I apologize. It's not the best to really tease out, but the water availability, but you can see from this map on the left, really the areas of blue show that there's water available. The map on the left shows when water is available in the month of August. Pretty much just the Willamette River is the only river that has any water availability during the August months. But on the right, we've got January available stream flow. and there's plenty of water available in January. So, this really lends itself to, well, how can I take that January water and make it useful to me in August? And the answer to that is simply storage. And so we have a process for, I think Andrew was saying, we kind of touched on this a little bit, and reservoir storage. If you want to take a reservoir, if you want to build a reservoir, this is the idea: is you take this January, and the seasons vary, but in my district, it's usually, water is usually available for November through March, and so, or May, even June in some places, and then you can build a reservoir, store that water during the winter months when we have plenty of water, and then use that stored water during the summer. But this would be required with water rights to do this. So, okay, I think I'm ready for next slide. So ponds and reservoirs, and so this is really talking more about the traditional pond and reservoir. And I don't, I know that a lot of the, I have Andrew's presentation really on the brain right now. So there is a lot of gray area and overlap, but in general, if you're storing surface runoff, even if it's off channel, so let's say you have a property and there's not even a perennial stream, but you're just collecting the water that's running off of the ground, the grass or the lawn or the field or whatever. Because we define that as surface water, if you're storing that water, it requires obtaining a water right. Even if the water is not used for irrigation. So if you just have a pond on your property, you still need to apply for a water right, because ponds really do create a disruption in surface water availability. If you imagine a big empty reservoir in August, and we finally get a much needed rain at the end of August, if that rain's just going to fill reservoirs, then it's not making it to the streams where it's needed for a variety of uses. And so so we have an application and permitting process to dictate when that water can be stored, how it can be stored. And fish passage is another really big issue in Oregon. We want to make sure that when you're creating those structures, that if there are any fish passage issues, that those are addressed during the permit process. So new applications are subject to water availability. That's referring back to the previous slide. And the storage season is typically winter months only. And those winter months vary based on the water availability basin numbers that we have. So if you apply for a water right to store water in a pond, and then you want to irrigate from that pond, that requires a secondary water right, because you're really doing two different things. When you're applying for a water right from a pond, you're taking water from a surface water source and you're storing it in a pond. But then when you're irrigating, you're taking water from a pond and putting it onto a field. And so, and you're doing these things in opposite seasons. So they require different water rates because they're for different practices. And then for any in-channel pond, fish passage is an issue. And so, a concern with, old existing ponds that, we're trying to make legal that become an enforcement issue now. It can be really tricky if you've had a pond that's been around for 20, 30 years that you didn't realize needed a water right. And then now you get it. And then now you've got to deal with the fish passage issue. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the application process that you would go through if you're getting a pond or a reservoir. We have two different classifications of reservoirs. One is statutory, and a statutory dam is one where the dam height is greater than 10 feet. So the crest of the dam is 10 feet, more than 10 feet from the natural ground. And the and is important there. It has to do both things. And it stores more than 9.2 acre feet of water. That's a pretty huge reservoir that I don't think a lot of people are creating reservoirs that size. But if you do want to build a reservoir that is that big, then we require engineering plans and specifications. And again, referring back to Andrew's presentation, I think that a dam where you have seepage through the dam, I don't think that that would be possible at that statutory level, just because statutory dams, because of the size, we put them into a classification where we do inspections for safety. There becomes a safety concern with dam failure, and when you've got water seeping through the face of a dam, that can be a red flag for dam failure. So there's also that safety aspect that comes into it. But we have another process. So if you have anything smaller, so if it doesn't meet both those classifications, if it's under 10 feet or if it's storing less than 9.2 acre feet of water, then you don't have to supply those engineering plans and specs. It's a much simpler process where it really just comes down to water availability and fish passage. So if water is available during the winter months for you to store, and if fish passage isn't an issue, then, knock on wood, I would say there's probably a fairly likely chance that you can get issued a water right for a reservoir. And then getting that secondary water right for irrigation out, that water's already been kind of taken out of the stream and appropriated into your reservoir. So getting that secondary permit to irrigate out of your reservoir is usually a pretty simple, quick step. And there is no minimum reservoir size. Even if it's a very small pond, if you're holding water with the intent to store water, it really needs a water right. How small is too small? Well, I would argue that if you get small enough, it's kind of like, well, there's really no point in even storing it. So, but any kind of useful amount of water, you would want to apply for a water right, definitely. So, let's see. Oh, California. No, California is very interesting. California only recently adopted, I'm sorry, this is a question from Alina. California actually did not have groundwater law until just a couple of years ago. Oregon adopted groundwater law in 1955 and surface water law in 1909. So we've been managing groundwater a long time and requiring water rights for a long time. And in California, they did not, right? You could just drill a well and pretty much go for it, as far as I'm understanding. Yeah, it's very interesting seeing water in California. I'm glad I work in Oregon. It seems a little bit simpler, but and is a water right needed in urban areas for water catchment tanks collected from roof runoff? No, it is not. And I have a rainwater harvesting slide that I'll get to, I think, pretty soon here. Okay, I think I'm ready for the next slide. So these are the steps that you have to go through when you're welcome, Alina. These are the steps that you go through when you're obtaining a new water right. It takes several years really to get from beginning to end. But when you're at that end process, that water right's done. And the only way it can get canceled is if you don't use it and then somebody forces a cancellation upon you, or if you voluntarily cancel your water right. So we have a really, because that water, we're allowing a water use to continue indefinitely into the future. We really want to make sure we do a very thorough evaluation of whether or not it is sustainable to, hand this water over indefinitely. So the first step of attaining a new water right is you submit an application. The day you submit the application to the department becomes your priority date. And so remember, back in the beginning, we talked about prior appropriation and water rights, being appropriated based on priority date. People with 1912 priority dates who are there, whatever the office looked like in 1911, that's the date that their water right is is guaranteed for. So we go through all our rules. We do a thorough evaluation of looking through all the laws, rules, regulations, and water availability. We also have a lot of built-in hold times. There's a public review process. It is public water, so if your neighbor wants to apply for a water right and you have a really specific reason why you don't think that water right should be issued, we want to hear from you, and we have a process for that. We have a public notice on our webpage. It's pretty easy to find. Sometimes it's things we can take into consideration. Sometimes it's not. If you just happen to hate your neighbor, that's not a reasonable, maybe not a reasonable reason to deny a water right. But if you have specific information about that stream and how often that stream dries up, or if you have a well that you've had to repeatedly deepen to chase your domestic water, that might be something we might take into account when issuing new water rights. So getting to that permit phase is the biggest hurdle, because that's where you go through water availability. That's where we go through all the can we issue this at all, and then if you make it through all those hurdles and we issue a permit, then that permit has a list of conditions. I mean, that I always kind of compare it to getting a building permit for a home. The permit just says, well, you can go build the home, but then you have to build the home and then come back and show us that you built the home to the conditions set forth in the permit. And so that's similar here with the permit. There's there's different conditions we place on permits. If there's a well, we definitely, if you're applying for a groundwater right, we definitely want to make sure that you take a static water level over time, because if your water use is causing the water table to decline, then we want to take the opportunity to collect that data and find out if do we want to keep based on this data from this water right, do we want to keep issuing new water rights in the area. And so and also permits will have they usually have a conditions on to meter the use. Sometimes if it's a large enough use, we want it to be reported to us annually, those kind of things. But there are many different kinds of conditions that can get on a permit. So you got permit in hand, you go out, you start, you drill the well that you propose to drill according to the permit conditions, you put in your irrigation lines, you go do all the things. Within 5 years of permit issuance, we want you to either come back to us and say you're done, or if you need more time, you can apply for an extension of time. And so that process called proving up, that's where you come back to us and say, here's our final map, here's our well log, here's how we did all the things, here are here is an engineer stamp showing that we did all the things set forth in the permit. And then that's when, and then after that, we have folks that go through those, it's called a claim of beneficial use. And so we have folks who go through those claims of beneficial use. And then if everything looks good, then we issue a certificate. And that water right certificate is the final document. And there are ways to change a certificate. And on here, transfers is getting to be a bigger and bigger one, because, in a lot of areas in Oregon, like in those groundwater limited areas I was just talking about, there are no new applications. But if you have a certificate already, and let's say you have a water right to use a well for this 10 acres right here, and this 10 acres just isn't working for you for whatever reason anymore, and you want to irrigate a different 10 acres, but you're not going to be taking any more water out of the ground, then that's what a transfer is for. And a transfer covers all kinds of uses to a certificate that, as long as they do not create enlargement, which means basically taking more water than you were taking before, and doesn't injure neighbors, or doesn't injure other water right holders or water users. So if you have a certificate and you want to change it, and you're not gonna, injure anybody else's water use, and you're not going to take any more water, then there's a process for that. And I think a lot of there's a lot of old water rights out there, that I think that this is getting to be more and more of an option when when a new water right can't be issued. It makes those old water rights much more valuable when you look at the prospect of being able to transfer them. Are the certs associated with the land or the owner? Oh, this is a great question. Does the cert transfer during a land sale? Yes, the water right goes with the, oh, excuse me, I think a little water. Yes, the water right goes with the land. And even, an interesting thing that happens sometimes, especially in my district, because it's so urban, tax lots can be broken up, and you can have a farm, like let's say there's a 40-acre farm that took water from the Clackamas River, with a water right from the 20s or whenever, and then it went to 40 acres. Well, if that land got divided up into 20 acres, all 20 of those people still own the portion of the water right that lies on their land, but they have to sort out between them how they're going to authorize access to that point of diversion, because that point of diversion from the river is defined on the certificate. It's defined on the certificate map, and it's pretty much set in stone unless somebody wants to, unless somebody transfers it. So I have definitely seen situations where a person has bought a property and they were told it had a water right, and they paid a premium price for that water right, and there's a landowner, but they don't have access to the source of water, the creek. The creek doesn't flow through their property. And one gal in particular, I remember she called and said, well, my neighbor doesn't want to give me access to the creek, but I have a water right for the creek. And pretty much, if you don't have, a water right doesn't allow you to trespass. So it's really, you're pretty much stuck. It's kind of an awful situation to have to explain to somebody, but you can't own something that's not on your property unless you have some kind of an agreement. And any agreements you have with easements, we don't enforce easements or anything. So like, let's say that person did have an agreement and an easement to go onto that other person's property and put a pump in the river and pump it across their land. If the landowner who owned the property adjacent to the river said, no, I'm going to throw your pipe in the garbage and I'm done, that's not something that I can enforce on. It's property, it's property trespass law, and it's a civil matter between landowners. So it can be something that's very tricky, that land ownership piece. All right, I'm going to read a couple questions here. Is the first in time, first in line system going to change? I don't see if that's, I think that the entire system of Oregon water law is based on that. And in fact, all the all the states to the west of the Mississippi are based on that. And I don't think that I don't think that that's anything that would change. Curious if it's being discussed at the state level and what is the, that's, I think that would, that would be a, if we came to that, it would be just kind of throwing everything up in the air and starting from scratch. And no, I have not seen any discussion on that. So Aaron, I'm not personally advocating for this, but do you see a future of water markets for Oregon, buying, selling, and trading water? So if you want to buy, sell, or trade water, you have to have a water right to do that. So there are certain classifications of use. So let's say you have a farm and you've got a water right to irrigate 10 acres from your well. And if you want to change that use, like let's say you want to sell it to somebody, well, you're not irrigating with it. And so you would have to, first of all, change the character of use on your water right through the transfer process. You'd have to change the character of use from irrigation to, let's say you wanted to start a bottled water company and sell bottled water to California or wherever. You would have to apply for a transfer. Change the character of use. We would again want to see that you're not taking any more water, and it would have to go through our transfer process. And that's, yeah. So even, there really is no free water in Oregon. It's all permitted. And once you hold a permit, if you can make a case for, once that water's been allocated, as we say, then, then you can either use it for as it's defined on the certificate, or you can apply for a transfer to do something different with it. Okay, so cancellation is another interesting thing. Oh, Albert, I'm going to get to that in 1 second. So cancellation is another, I need to keep an eye on the time. Cancellation is another interesting one that I like to make people aware of. Usually when I'm giving a class in person, I like to get a kind of show of hands of who owns land, who's shopping for land, who's, that kind of thing. Because if you're looking to buy a piece of land that has a water right on it, if that water hasn't been used for at least once every 5 years for the past 15 years. So let's say it wasn't used from 2008 to 2014, and there was somebody near you, a neighbor, who could prove that. If you bought that piece of land and started irrigating, they could come to us and say, hey, that water right was not used for a 5-year consecutive period. And here's my, here's an affidavit to prove that. We don't make the determinations because, me as a Watermaster, I get out in the field a lot. But on the other hand, if somebody irrigated their hayfield once in 2014 and I wasn't there that day, I really don't usually have enough information to comment whether or not that's the case. But what we really do is we help to just provide whatever department documents are about the water right. We provide that to both sides. And then if the, usually both sides eventually lawyer up. If they decide they want to fight it, they both end up getting lawyers. And it will, if they don't settle out of court, then it would go in front of an administrative law judge. And I have seen a couple cancellations happen in my district. So if you are buying a property that someone says that has a water right on it, go ahead and give me a call. I should have said that earlier on, but if anybody has any questions, please, I always welcome any kind of questions or conversations. And if you're looking to buy a piece of property and it has a water right on it, or if someone says it has a water right, please, I'm more than happy to, take whatever time to go over all these things, because it's tough when it's after the fact and you've already bought the land. I always would rather folks call me before they get into a situation. All right, next slide, please. If I have another one, I might be at the end. Oh no. Oh, Matt, are you there? Oh, there we go. Rainwater harvesting. So yes, Albert. So this is where we get into rainwater. So the department defines rainwater as water that is collected off of an artificial impervious surface. So that line, so, you know, as an agency, you know, we get pushed, you know, our laws and regulation and rules, you know, get tested over and over again. And that fine line between rainwater harvesting and surface water is artificial impervious surface or natural ground. So any water that comes off of a roof goes through a pipe and goes into a tank. That is rainwater. We define it as rainwater, and you can use that water without a water right for any purpose you want. Irrigation, anything. Does not require a water right at all. But it really depends on how it's collected. If you dam up a river and say it was once rain, that's not true. It's not rainwater anymore. It became surface water. When folks come to me and are interested in harvesting rainwater for irrigation, you know, I like to make sure folks know that in Oregon, you know, even here west of the Cascades, it is not unusual for us to see 90 to 100-day stretches without rain. And I'm sure this group probably can go way more into that than I can. But the good thing about rainwater, so remember when we were talking about surface water and how surface water is available in the wintertime, but not in the summertime? The benefit to rainwater is because rainwater is truly exempt, you can collect rainwater completely year round. Oh, I'm getting behind on questions. So, so Albert, so when you talk about putting it into a downspout into a small pond, if that pond has a liner and a berm, well, I mean, if I wouldn't want to talk about how small, you know, there are other practices of surface water that don't require a water right that we define as land management practices to improve water quality. And I think that some of, you know, and so those are kind of, let me give you an example before I go on. Those are the kind of activities where, like maybe you've seen when they put in a new subdivision, and then they'll create a kind of a big swale where the water comes in and then it settles down before it goes out into, you know, the runoff into the stream to help improve the water quality. The reason we don't require a water right for those is because the point isn't to store the water the long term. The point is to just slow down runoff. So when you're just slowing down runoff, then it doesn't require a water right. But then when we get into these other areas of we're slowing down and holding back runoff and then irrigating with it, I mean, especially if you take water out, if you pump water out and irrigate with it, that definitely would require a water right. I'm curious to explore more when we talk about the swales. I just want to make sure that those are being done in a way that doesn't require a water right. And I think that that's gonna, you know, it's probably going to be something that we're going to have to, you know, look at in the future and really kind of work to really narrow down what is going to require a water right and what isn't. But that's why I'm happy I'm a part of this group. Don, explain the water uses for soil conservation and water quality are exempt. Can you give it? Oh, okay. I think I might have just answered that. Just collected water and landscaping earthworks that is meant for infiltration, water, native trees, or recharge groundwater for quality. Yeah, Don, I think I hopefully I just mostly answered that for you. But again, I'd encourage anybody to just call me with specific questions. But that I think that in a lot of cases it wouldn't require a water right, and then a lot of cases it might require a water right. It might be something where it really depends on the specific project, because you know we don't want to have a situation where, you know, in Oregon, streams, you know, when we talk about drought, we really have a hard time keeping water in streams during the summertime. And so anything that's going to even though, yes, there's a good benefit for soil moisture and water table, we want to make sure that that water is getting to the streams, because the streams, and especially fish, really depend on those flows. Jeanette, yeah, it can be done. Artificial impervious surface, yeah, lay the tarps out. There is a Claire Clock who works for the Clackamas Soil and Water Irrigation District. He worked with landowners to basically create giant outdoor storage tanks, underground storage tanks. I wish I had something to write on here, but basically, if you excavate a big area and then line it and then put a berm around it, the berm protects the surface water from coming in. The liner prevents the groundwater from infiltrating in, because if you dig and you expose the water table, that's groundwater, and it needs a water right. So yeah, there is a way to create a giant pond that is bermed, lined, and then you have gutters running into it. When people want to put those in, I generally recommend that you can give me a call and have me come take a look at it, and but especially if, before you bury any pipes or line or anything, because a lot of times if you take an excavator to the ground and start digging, chances are someone's going to call, a neighbor's going to call me. Yeah. So Jason, I think I kind of got to that. The pond, if the bed of that pond is natural material, while that water is on the roof and in your gutter, then it's exempt, it's rainwater. But once it comes out of the gutter and touches the natural ground, that's the moment where that water becomes not exempt. So, oh, Kathy, hi, Kathy. Cisterns. Oh boy. Kathy, I wasn't sure if that was a question, but that might be about springs. Springs typically we define as surface water. Sometimes if someone's using them for domestic use, we can look at it and say it's a hand dug well. But because that hand dug well wouldn't meet well construction standards, you wouldn't be able to get a groundwater right for it. So yeah, any kind of a spring or anything like that would be subject to that water availability, where water's not available during the summer. Okay, so that's rainwater harvesting, and I hope to really, I think that rainwater harvesting is an area where I'd really like to dig in with this group, because I think that rainwater harvesting is going to be really great for the future. And I do always like taking the opportunity to remind folks that rainwater harvesting is allowed in Oregon. I think a lot of stuff circulates on Facebook. There's stories, where people say, well, what's next? Are they going to start regulating the air? Well, yeah, we do that. That's what the DEQ does. But, yeah, rainwater harvesting, I've never heard any sniffs of that going anywhere. I don't get any indication that that's going to be not allowed in the future. And I think especially for applications that like the Dry Farming Institute is involved in, I think it could be a really great way, to get like a little bit of water to get you through, really dry times. So, Catherine, if a permit's issued and there are 5 years to show beneficial use, how can the right be maximized once it's perfected? For example, if the current use is 1 CFS and the permit's for 5 CFS. Oh, so Catherine, what you would do in that situation is, if you're not using the 5 CFS yet, just apply for an extension of time and fully grow into that water right. That's how that will be done. So yeah, I think I'm ready for the next slide now. I think we got rainwater, and I think my next one's so this is a typical rainwater harvesting setup for a home. You guys are the farmers, so not a farmer, and so I really don't have a sense of, you know, how far this water would get you. I do know that, you know, some general numbers that are, you know, for irrigation, you know, if you're doing overhead irrigation, this is how much water you would expect to use per acre. If you're doing drip irrigation, this is how much water you would expect to use per acre. But I think, you know, something that I'm really excited about with this group is I think that this is going to be, you know, I think it's going to bring the little amount of rainwater that you can harvest in really small setups like this one here, really stretching a really small amount of water, where you don't need to get a water right and go through all that hassle, and really stretch a small amount of water over the maximum acreage. So I think I still have another slide after this. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess I don't. You know, what I really just want to leave everyone with is I just call me if you have anything. Thank you, Jeanette. You know, if you have any questions, just call me. I'm always happy to answer. You know, take some time surfing around our website. It's you know, it's about as easy to navigate as any government website, which is not that easy. So if you know, if you have questions about our mapper or anything, applying for new water rights, if you're looking to buy properties, I get a lot of calls from people who are looking to buy properties, and you know, and I definitely connect with a lot of other water organizations. Oh, Stephanie, I realized at the beginning that I didn't have a contact info for me. Here, I'll type my email address. But yeah, that's what I would just leave you with is just don't be shy. Just call me anytime if you have any questions. I work with a lot of conservation districts, cities, counties, DEQ, DSL. So if you're doing a project, I've kind of dealt with enough organizations that I can at least get you a head start on other agencies that you might also need to do permitting through. Because sometimes, you know, with water projects, you know, you've got to deal with the county, DSL, and us, and DEQ, and maybe ODF and W. So I know it can be overwhelming. So if you want to use me as a starting point, I'm happy to do that. Let me get my phone number down here too.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy, for that great presentation.
Welcome.
I'm originally from Indiana, so when I moved out to Oregon over a decade ago and started to learn about water rights, I had no clue about them. And then in my position with Extension, a lot of farmers call into the Extension office and they're like, I just moved on a piece of property. I'm trying to learn about what I can grow here. So we talk about soil type and water rights, and a lot of the growers I talk to, especially new and beginning farmers, are on land without water rights, and they are either leasing or some are lucky enough to own, but a lot of times they don't have water rights. So that's really where we kind of started working on the dry farming work. And yeah, it's really, I really appreciate kind of the connection to Amy and the Oregon Water Resources Department, just to help clarify that, because it's there's a lot of gray area. I think the takeaway in some ways is like, if you don't know, just contact, because there's a lot of gray area in water law and water rights and where the lines are.
Yeah, and that's definitely true, Amy. And, you know, another thing that I like to, you know, remind folks is that, you know, we're coming from a place of, you know, we're a regulatory and enforcement agency. And so it's great when we're, you know, it is a treat to deal with an organization whose goal is to use as little water as possible, but also to remember that our laws and regulations are meant to cover everybody. So it's meant to cover the full spectrum of every water user in Oregon, some of whom care about conservation and some of whom may not, and really need that regulation to keep them in place. And so it's, yeah, so some of these practices, you know, I look at them, I'm like, does that need a water right? Doesn't it, you know, and a lot of them might just be case by case. but I'm really interested in hoping to forge some new ground and really defining where a lot of these new practices are. And hopefully we can maybe define like a particular practice where we can say, okay, you guys can go out and do all of this practice such that it looks like X, Y, and Z, and you should be okay, so that folks don't have to contact us and, have that, discussion over and over again. But anyway.
Question for you, Amy. I remember in the Capitol Press, maybe it was like a year or so ago, there was a big article on the front page about reallocations of water rights. And I was like, and there's people in the nursery industry that were upset about it. I don't have the article here in my office right now to like really tell you much more than that, but does that ring a bell at all?
It doesn't, but I mean, I'm not sure what they would mean by reallocation. It's not something, I wonder if it has to do with the adjudication process. I didn't really talk about the adjudication process, but I'll just kind of talk about it real quickly if I have a minute. And that might be what that is, but I'm not sure. But so I remember I said that Oregon water law was adopted in 1909. But if you were here in 1906 and you said, well, hey, I don't want to apply today and get today's priority date, I want my 1906 priority date. And so you could submit a surface water claim, and then we keep all those claims in a special file. And then once in a blue moon, we'll go through and we'll adjudicate a basin. And when we adjudicate the basin, that's when we go through all those claims. And of course, the tribes came and said, hey, guess what? Guess who was using water first? We were. So, I'm sure you've all read in the paper, or just go Google it. There's so much great, articles about the Klamath adjudication, and the tribes won big in the Klamath Basin. And so that might be what they're talking about. But I'm not sure, but it's some adjudication processes are really interesting and definitely worth looking at. But my understanding is that the Willamette Basin isn't going to be allocated within my lifetime. So I'm hoping to retire and not have to go through that and be in the paper every week. My goal is to stay out of the paper.
Do we have any other final questions before we take our next break? I want to note that we have if you're not planning to attend any other sessions, even if this is the only one you're attending today, we would love to have your feedback on our evaluation. We'd really appreciate it, and our funders would too. So it's just there in the chat box if you wouldn't mind taking a few moments. And if there's no other questions, Amy, thank you so much for your time today. And yeah, we really appreciate it.
Amy, thank you. I'm really always appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this group. I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Me too. All right, I'm gonna pull up the agenda just so if you're sticking around, just to remind you of our schedule here for the remainder of the day. So you can see here that we're ending a little bit early. So we'll be coming back at 1 p.m. for our third session with Matt Delaney. And then we'll have a little bit of a wrap-up discussion before we adjourn at 2:30. So we'll be moving you all back to the waiting room so we can get set up for our third presentation. But hope you are able to get some fresh air, a little screen break, and maybe some lunch.